Hello, welcome to a new edition of the Right Wing Populist Podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So today I want to talk about the late great Scott Adams. Unfortunately, as many of you listening probably know, Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, the host of the Coffee with Scott Adams show, the podcast that was daily, when he would, have his cup of coffee and he'd go over different topics, mostly political, but among many other things. Unfortunately, Scott Adams, he passed away recently because of cancer. I believe it was prostate cancer. And we sort of knew it was coming, unfortunately. He sort of announced it back last year, early last year. You know, as we know, for those who are following, Joe Biden announced that he had prostate cancer. And when that news broke, Scott Adams announced that he also had prostate cancer and that it had metastasized and that he was thinking he was going to have to die very soon. Luckily, he did get some treatments that prolonged his life for a bit, but unfortunately, he did lose his battle with prostate cancer. And it's a shame. And many people in the right wing media community have been mourning the loss of him ever since the last couple of days. And rightfully so. Scott Adams was very influential, and he was a good man. And he really helped explain the Trump phenomenon. And he explained it in terms that was different from most people. Most people just explained it through political terms or in political ways. He was able to explain the Trump phenomenon through the perspective of persuasion, how he was able to persuade so many people, how his unorthodox tendencies was actually what made him so unique. So RIP Scott Adams, and like I said, many people have been mourning his death, but unfortunately, there have been people that haven't been, and I want to discuss that. But before we get into it all, I need you to do something for me, folks. I need you to subscribe, whether you're listening on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Please subscribe, and if you are listening on the YouTubes, like and comment. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. We've been doing really well on YouTube so far, especially, so let's keep it going. So when I say that there are people who are not mourning the death of Scott Adams, what I mean specifically is you have People's Magazine, that rag of an outlet. They released a headline saying, Scott Adams, disgraced Dilbert creator, dies at 68. Now, okay, first off, I'm not a fan of distasteful comments and headlines about the people who are newly dead. I've never liked it, even people who I don't like, people like Dick Cheney. I didn't like what Trump said about Rob Reiner when he was killed by his son. I'm not a big fan of Rob Reiner, but I thought, Trump's post about him was distasteful. I just don't like negative comments on the newly deceased. I get it if they're, a public official, like someone like a former president, former vice president, people like Dick Cheney, Jimmy Carter. I'm not saying you can't criticize those people, but, in the wake of it, several days after, it's just so distasteful to me. I don't know. I've never liked it and I've never done it. Even in just, talking to my friends, I've always sort of been restrained. So the person who wrote this headline in this article, her name is, let me get her name real fast. It's Ava Victoria, or Victoria Edel. I'm not exactly sure. It's Victoria on X, but Victoria Edel, that is her name. And of course, she's like this fat, ugly-looking woman. Figures. And the reason why she says he's disgraced is because I think a year or two ago, Scott Adams said something very controversial about African American people. And I'm going to play the clip now because out of context, you could see why people would say, oh, that's terrible. You shouldn't say that. So I'm going to play the clip, but then I'm also going to play later his explanation. I think his explanation sort of explains very well why it really wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. But let's play the clip that people keep saying now is proof that Scott Adams is racist. He's racist. Okay, but here's the clip.
And I would say, based on the current way things are going, the best advice I would give to white people is to get the hell away from black people. Just get the fuck away. Wherever you have to go, just get away. Because there's no fixing this. This can't be fixed. All right, this can't be fixed. You just have to escape. So that's what I did. I went to a neighborhood where, I have a very low black population. Because unfortunately, there's a high correlation between the density. And this is according to Don Lemon, by the way. So here I'm just quoting Don Lemon when he notes that the when he lived in a mostly black neighborhood, there were a bunch of problems that he didn't see in white neighborhoods. So even Don Lemon sees a big difference in your own quality of living based on where you live and who's there. So I think it makes no sense whatsoever as a white citizen of America to try to help black citizens anymore. It doesn't make sense. It's no longer a rational impulse. And so I'm going to back off from being helpful to black America because it doesn't seem like it pays off. Like I've been doing it all my life, and the only outcome is I get called a racist. That's the only outcome. It makes no sense to help black Americans if you're white. It's over. Don't even think it's worth trying. Totally not trying.
So, in all fairness, and I want to be fair, I'm always fair on this podcast. That clip out of context does sound pretty bad, very provocative at the very least. I totally understand that. However, you're missing the context, and people who are going around saying that this is proof that Scott Adams was racist, he was a bigot, he exemplifies what's wrong with MAGA, everything that's wrong with MAGA, that deep down all these Trump supporters, whether they support him for political reasons or they're just admirers of his talent, his persuasion talent, his marketing talents, deep down they're just secretly racist, they hate black people, etc. So people on the left, they've been taking that clip I just played out of context, and they're trying to smear Scott Adams. This is what People Magazine was doing, that fat lesbian-looking chick. That's what she did, Victoria. Ugly-looking woman. I hate to be rude, but it's true. Like I said, I'm fair, but I'm also truthful. That is a fat, ugly woman, that Victoria lady. You should look her up. Actually, you shouldn't look her up. Do your eyes a favor and don't look her up. But oh my God. But they're saying Scott Adams is racist because of this. And, out of context, I could sort of see it. But here's Scott Adams. He was doing an interview with Cenk Uygur, the fat water buffalo guy. Shout out Steven Crowder. Great nickname that he gave him. He was being interviewed with Scott Adams a few months ago after he was starting to recover a little bit from his prostate cancer because he was taking testosterone blockers, which is what extended his life a couple months. And Cenk Uygur, the fat water buffalo, he asked him about this controversial clip. And Scott Adams, he broke down in pretty good detail, and I think he explained himself very well for why that clip's not as bad as it sounds. And I'm going to play, it's a little bit of a longer clip, but I want to play the whole thing because, people are trying to smear him in his death because of that clip I played. And I want you to hear from his own voice, his explanation for it. And I think in reality, Scott wasn't trying to be racist. He was trying to be resourceful. He was trying to be realistic. So let's hear his explanation for why he made those controversial comments.
Can I ask you a question first about how you received that? What did you think the context was? Because the context always gets removed.
Yeah, no, I don't know the context. That's why I'm asking you. Yeah, I'm not being unfair. That's why I wanted to know what you meant by it.
The reason that got canceled is if you take that out of context, the way you just explained it, it sounds really bad. If you put it in context.
Is there a good context for it? Yeah, help me out here. Go ahead.
Yeah, there actually is. In fact, nobody's disagreed with me yet once they've heard the context. So let me give you some context. It was during the height of the DEI, ESG, CRT, in which people in schools and corporations and in the media were being trained that the problem with the world was people like me, white men, basically, and that we had, in one way or another, our forefathers or us had stolen things from Black Americans in particular, and Black Americans should be trying to get it back. Now, if you find yourself ever in a situation where there's a large population of people who think you're the problem, that's not an ideal situation for you to be around. And you're not really going to be able to fix it because, it's not like you can have a personal conversation with every person. So I had kind of been fed up at that point, and I had a lifetime of frustration with this. Just take you back a few decades. My first job was for a bank in the 80s. And I was sort of on the fast track. I had I was working on my MBA, had a degree in economics. I was a perfect banker. And one day my boss called me into her office and she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I know you were looking forward to this promotion, but I was told by management I can't give you a promotion now or ever because you're a white man and we don't have enough diversity. And so I said, well, how long is that going to last? And there was no answer. It looked like it could last forever. So I quit, went to the phone company, and I got in the fast track for management at the phone company, local phone company, Pacific Bell. And things were looking great. I was in what they called the binder, which means it was a list of people that they had identified as likely senior management someday. You could make a lot of money as a senior management at a phone company. And so things were looking good. And one day my boss called me in and he said, and I'm not making this up, this really happened. He said, I don't know how to tell you this, but management just sent down the word that you can't be promoted because you're a white male. Now that's when I started doing Dilbert on the side that eventually allowed me to escape the corporate world and go out on my own. So keep in mind that I had experienced what it's like to be in a situation where you're a white guy and the environment says, you're the problem, white guy. You're the problem. Now, could I stay and fix all of that? If I had stayed at the bank, could I have fixed that? No. If I had stayed at the phone company, could I have fixed that? I mean, just for myself? No. The only thing I could do was leave. And then I was watching it get worse and worse until, almost everybody who was a white male was discovering the same problem. And they're more willing to talk about it now. It was super widespread. But in that environment, I would say that you should look to get an environment that doesn't have you as the target. Something that says, oh, everybody's equal, or that your contribution to the world is what matters. Are you useful? Are you not useful? That's the world I want to live in. Now, the actual words I said were meant to be hyperbole, and they were meant to wake people up. In other words, I wanted people to say, what the hell are you saying? And get into a reasonable debate in which I could say what I just did. And then what I like to do to help people really understand it is to give them this example. Suppose you're a black family and let's say you get a promotion and you're going to move to a new town near work. You've got a choice of two towns. One of the towns is known to have an active Ku Klux Klan membership that's growing. The other one doesn't. Which one is the smart one to move into? Obviously, you would stay away from the town that had the Ku Klux Klan membership, even if it was only 2% of the town. You would be wise to say, well, I can't really fix that. I'm not going to make the Klan go away in this town, but I could go to this other town. So generally speaking, I give the advice that works in a lot of situations. You have to know when to fight and when to remove yourself. Now, in the real world, could you really remove yourself from, Black Americans? No. That's why it was hyperbole. There's no actual way to do that. And even if you could figure one out, it probably wouldn't work for you. But I wanted to make the point that DEI and CRT and ESG and that whole messaging that white men were the problem is unsustainable. Now, of course, I would argue that history has agreed with me because now that stuff, at least at the federal level, is literally illegal. And it's illegal because it's not useful. It's harmful.
So like I said, sorry, a little bit of a longer clip, but I thought it was really important that we played his explanation because of all the controversy that those comments caused and the fact that people on the left are smearing him in his death. It's so disgraceful. The point Scott Adams was trying to make, even if he didn't do it artfully in his original comments, but I think his explanation clears it up quite well, is there is a culture, particularly obviously within the left and many left-wing leaning institutions A lot of people in the corporate world unfortunately fall into the spectrum because many people from the corporate world come from these universities that are crazy far left institutions that hate white men. The point is that if you are white men trying to navigating through the corporate world through many of these left-leaning institutions, you are discriminated against. And it's becoming more and more of a problem. Now, there's been a push against this anti-white male discrimination, especially with Trump back in office. We've been trying to roll back many of these DEI programs. Affirmative action has been ruled unconstitutional in many contexts now, thanks to the Supreme Court. But it's still a problem, and there is still, I'm sorry, look, I'm totally willing to admit that there is still racism on the right. There's no question about that. You can just look at Nick Fuentes and his supporters and you'll see it. But there is also a racist element on the left, and it's targeted against white people, particularly white men. It's also a little bit of, not just racist, but a bit sexist in reverse, sexist toward men. There is an anti-white male, anti-white men sentiment on the left, and you've seen it in the corporate world and many left-wing institutions like college universities, campus universities. And Scott Adams was simply calling it out. And when he said we need to stay away from black people, what he was saying, and I wouldn't say this, and I don't really agree with this, but the point he was making was when you have a group of people that have been trained to hate someone the way many African Americans, particularly at college campuses, have been sort of implicitly told that they must hate white people, maybe it's in white people's interest to stay away from those said people. Now, I wouldn't have said it that way, and I don't really agree with that framing, but there's no question that there is a problem on the left with being anti-white male. That's just a fact. Maybe it's because many of these people are led by women who dated high-profile, well-to-do white men, and the white men led them on, and therefore they have this grudge against white men going forward in life. I don't know what the problem is. Maybe that's why Victoria doesn't like Scott Adams, because she got fat in her relationship and he dumped her because of it. I don't know. She's pretty fat right now. Maybe she was always fat. I'm trying to be generous to her. Maybe she was beautiful at one time. Victoria's not beautiful now, but that's okay. I'm sorry I'm being so mean to her, but she wrote a disgusting headline, a disgusting story about Scott Adams. So I need to call her out. Not that she will see this. She's too busy eating her hamburgers to probably ever listen to this podcast, so that's okay. But that's what Scott Adams was saying. He was saying that there is a problem in this culture that's gotten better, especially with Trump back in office, but there is a problem with being anti-white male. And we're supposed to be against all forms of bigotry in this country. We're supposed to say no to all types of discrimination, even if it's against a group of people that have historically held positions of power like white men have. That's true. I don't want to be disingenuous to the dumb left-wingers. But that doesn't mean you should be anti-white male. It doesn't mean that you should be discriminated against white men, which is what affirmative action and what DEI programs have done. So that's the point Scott Adams was making. Maybe he made it unartfully in his first attempt. But I think when he explained it to Cenk Uygur, I think he explained it very well. It's probably the most fair interpretation of his comments anyway. So I just wanted to clear the air because people attacking Scott Adams when he's just a couple of days removed from passing away, I just think it's so disgusting. And he was a good man. He was a good man, and I pray for his family. I pray for Scott. I guess he accepted Jesus, even though he sort of did it in an interesting way. Basically, like the whole wager idea that nothing to lose by converting to Christianity right on your deathbed. So whether or not he genuinely accepted Christ in his life, who knows? It doesn't really matter. It's good that he did it anyway. And R.I.P. Scott Adams. You will be missed, and you're already missed. There's no question about it. Anyway, that's it for today, folks. We should be back tomorrow. Again, please subscribe, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. I do greatly appreciate it. Like I said, the traffic's been great. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, a quick update on Iran. It seemed like we were going to strike Iran yesterday. I mean, there were planes headed, leaving the United States, military planes that were heading toward Iran. You had U.S. officials, Canadian officials, European officials telling their citizens they should leave Iran. It really looked like we were going to strike Iran with all the mass protests going on there, but we didn't. It didn't happen. At least it hasn't happened yet. I don't know. Maybe when I'm recording this podcast, it will have happened. But there was reports that the Qataris, Saudi Arabia, many other Middle Eastern countries that get along with President Trump, that they essentially convinced him to back off striking him and try to give Iran a chance to continue to negotiate with them. Now, whether or not that actually happens, whether or not that's a good idea, I don't know. I don't really support getting involved with Iran's business because I don't see it benefiting us really. I see it benefiting Israel, but not the United States. So I'm pretty much against it. But it does seem like maybe Trump's using some restraint with Iran, but I don't know. I still think it's more likely than not that we will strike them in some capacity. But we'll see. It's also possible that Iran has been telling U.S. officials through back channels that if you do strike us because of these protests, we'll either strike Israel or we'll strike Qatar. And obviously, the United States doesn't want that. So we'll see what happens. So there's a quick update on the Iran situation. But like I said, thanks for listening, folks. Again, please like and subscribe, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Greatly appreciate it. We should be back tomorrow. Hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.